Hi again. Let's continue working on our component and talking about state and components. We're actually we've kind of covered state already. We're just kind of working on the component to get some of the details out of the way. And so far our timer kind of looks like this. Here, we'll refresh it. And if we play, it counts in seconds. There we go, right? And when it pauses, right? So let's talk about that for a moment. I'm going to go into my timer, and you'll see it's counting in seconds here, and they're semi-accurate. We're going to kind of work on the accuracy a little bit too, but it's counting every 1,000 milliseconds. Let's speed that up to every 100 milliseconds, right? So now it should be counting 10 times a second. And you can see when it gets into 2 digits, we got 2 there, and when it gets up to 60, it should really chalk up 1 minute and then show the seconds over here 0 to 60 again. Okay, so how are we going to handle that? I think we should handle that maybe here in our format time method. So we have a method specific for formatting the time, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to call this method, pass in the time right here, right, and then do some math on it, and then display the value returned over here inside of our text field. So instead of displaying the time directly here, imagine that the time here was in milliseconds. I'd like to convert that into seconds and minutes and format it with the colon and pad with zeros and that kind of stuff, and then put that here in display in our text object, right? So let's take a look at our method here, and let's say this could take in time. Okay, we got to get time from the state also, but why don't we just pass it in, right? And then we want to format the time this way. So imagine that this is milliseconds, right? We should make that ms. Well, we'll just call it time, but know that that's milliseconds, right? Okay, so let's say const, and to get seconds from milliseconds, what we're going to do is we're going to divide by 1,000. Okay, so let's call this how about seconds? Okay, and we'll say this is going to be, and I'm going to do math floor on time divided by 1,000. And JavaScript, all numbers are kind of floats, right? So if I divide by 1,000, it might give me a fraction, right? So if it gives me a fraction, then I'm just going to round it down to seconds here, right? Now this is not quite right yet, because the time that we're getting up here that we're counting is not in milliseconds, right? We're counting in tenths of seconds right now. So if I change this to 1, then that would be milliseconds. We're actually going to do it a little bit differently later, but so we might actually have to adjust this number just for testing. But in the end, we're going to keep track of our time in milliseconds. We're going to need to divide by 1,000. Okay, and now what we'll do is we'll calculate the seconds. Okay, so first of all, let's get our seconds here, right? And so the seconds are going to be equal to seconds mod 60. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to divide by 60 and give us the whole number remainder. And when we do mod 60, then the value here should be 0 to 59 for any value of seconds. So if seconds is like 372, if we divided by 60, we would get the whole number remainder, and this would be the value, and it would always be a range 0 to 60 or 0 to 59. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's get the minutes. So minutes are going to be, and we're going to have to do math floor again. So to calculate minutes, you're just going to take your seconds and divide by 60. Okay, and then we should do a mod on this also, because if we have, if we wanted to add hours here, then after 60 minutes we should chalk up 1 hour, right? I don't really have an hour yet, and I'm not going to let the timer run for an hour, but if we wanted to do that, we would do mod 60 here too, right? And then we could calculate hours. Okay. And then actually I made a little mistake here. Instead of the S here, since this one is only going to run 0 to 60, this really needs to be seconds, right? So this is the total number of seconds, right? So this number might be, 342 seconds, but this will always be the number of seconds you know, divided by 60, right? So this would be like 42 seconds, right? So then this 342 seconds divided by 60 would give us, you know, 5 minutes, right? Something like that, right? So now we've got that. What I want to do is I want to return a value now from this function that is in this form. So it's going to be 2 digits for minutes, a colon, and then 2 digits for seconds. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to check, and we'll say constant. I'm going to make SS for the, you know, this value, right? So we'll say this is going to be equal to, and what I want to do is I want to check the seconds that we got here, right? And ask the question, is this less than 10, right? So if it's less than 10, I'm going to use this ES6 string, the string concatenation thing. So if you use the back tick, this is the character to the left of the number 1 on the keyboard, right? So if our value is less than 10, we want to return a 0 and the value of S, right? So if our value is 0 through 9 here, then we'll put a 0 in front of it, right? So this is a new way to concatenate a string. Like the old way would have been like this. I'll do the old way here. You might have said, actually, I guess I can't, but like the old way would have been, you know, 0 plus S, right? So this one seems like it's more work here, but actually in the long run, this is actually easier, right? But anyway, so this concatenates or puts these two together. So you're allowed to insert a variable into the string with this kind of format here, as long as you've used the backticks around the outside. Okay, so now if our S value is greater than 10, or 10 or greater, right, then what we'll do is we'll just return, as a string, we'll just return S, okay? So now let's do the same thing for minutes, right? So our double minute here, MM, that'll be this guy, right? What we'll do is we'll say you are going to be minutes. If, you know, let's check first. If minutes is less than 10, then we'll return 0 and minutes. Or, you know, if minutes is 10 or greater, we'll return, we'll just return the value for minutes, right? So there we go, right? So now we're going to return our formatted string, and it will be, and we can do this thing again, and we'll just say minutes colon seconds, right? Okay, so now we've got our formatter set up. And now what do we do, right? So we got our formatter set up. Why don't we use it down here in the render method, right? So we'll say const, let's see, why don't we just call it time, right? And so we'll call time, and then we'll put time here, we'll declare it, and then we'll call format time. And again, our time property on state is not keeping track of time in milliseconds yet. So the timer here won't quite run right, but what we'll do is we'll just send it in anyway, and then we're going to fix the time value in a moment, right? But what we'll do is we'll pass in this.state.time, okay? And then this should return our formatted time, and then we can just take the time and put it here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Like I said, the time here is not going to be quite right, so I'm going to speed that up. Maybe I'll just make that every 10 milliseconds, right? And then we'll run. Oh, can't find variable format time. Yeah, I made a mistake here. I forgot to put this in front of this dot format time, right? Because it belongs to our class here, so we have to put this. Let's try it again. Let's refresh. Oh, there we go, right? So that looks pretty good. And then we'll run. Oh, I forgot. We got to do, hey, wait a minute. That should be working pretty good. I forgot because we're adding tens, but then it's got to count to 1,000, right? let me, let's try and adjust that. Maybe if we adjust this 1,000 right here to something else. What if we just divide by 10, right? Let me refresh it there. Oh, there we go, right? Oh, so now we'll wait for it to count up to 60, right? Or it should get to 59. And then roll over to 1 second, and then it pads with 0. So we won't wait for this to count up to 60, but that should work too because we did it the same way, right? So we'll wait for 59, and then it counts up 2. So that's working pretty good, and the stop still works, right? So our timer is not quite right yet. Okay, so before we conclude this video, I'm going to go set this back to what it was before. In the end, this is going to have to be divided by 1,000, and then our timer up here, we're going to adjust that in a little bit. Okay, but make sure that the constant here is set to time divided by 1,000, because we're assuming that this time here is coming in milliseconds, right? And then we're going to do a little trick on the time and how we calculate the time up here later, okay? Or actually it'll happen here in update, okay? So anyway, thanks for watching, and then we'll continue this or wrap this up in the next video.